By 1912, the Japanese themselves had mixed feelings about their swift rise to economic and military power.
They were saying to themselves, what price progress? We have all these factories and the trains, but haven't we lost something? Is all this speed up worth it? And there were really ambivalent feelings all over Japan, especially among Japan's literary men, the writers, the thinkers of that time.
The poet laureate of this new ambivalence was Natsume Soseki, Japan's most famous novelist. His characters see the inevitability of modern times, and yet they long for the comfort of traditions that already have been lost.
You sat there in a streetcar along with other people. You didn't know who they were. You were completely alienated. Loneliness is the price we have to pay for living in the modern age, said Soseki. And where were you most lonely? In the middle of all those other people on the streetcar. Well, for the laboring classes in Tokyo, the streetcar for the first time was a public conveyance they could afford. And what it really stands for, it seems to me, is the difficulty that any country, any society has in making this transition to modern times. Modern times are tough. It is not the same thing to work in a factory as to work in a paddy field. It is not the same thing to live in a city as to live in a village. It is not the same thing as it was to live in an older agricultural society. And by the end of the Meiji period, there was no one who wanted to roll the railway tracks back up and give away the trains.
In his most famous novel, Kokoro, Soseki recalled the death of Meiji in 1912. On the night of the Emperor Meiji's funeral, I sat in my study and listened to the booming of the cannon. To me, it sounded like the last lament for the passing of an age. Now the Meiji Emperor rests in this quiet tomb outside of Kyoto. Visitors are few. The society whose turbulent birth he legitimized has passed him by.
It was Meiji's era that revolutionized Japan. In a sense, the Japanese remade their own character. It was really the first time in history that an Asian nation, a non-Western nation, had modernized itself by its own efforts. This was a tremendous achievement. It was a transformation. It was a catalyst. It set in motion forces, economic forces, political forces, and cultural forces that are still working among us today.
The nationalism inspired by Meiji would lead to a war in the Pacific and provoke revolutions in Vietnam and Indonesia. The brief era of Western domination would end abruptly as Asians rose to reclaim the region. Today, the legacy of Meiji lives on from South Korea to Singapore. For Meiji's government set the pattern for a new economic model in Asia whose power has transformed the Pacific and the world.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB Project and by the Ford Foundation. Additional funding was provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, and others.